So is Stonehenge just the most famous
one
of those?
Yeah. But there's about 800. You know, they're incredible, and they were built from many thousands BC. You know, on down to the Iron Age, and the ancient peoples of these islands and other parts of Northwest Europe believe that we live in symbiotic relationship with all of nature and with the cosmos. So the circles are aligned on different axes to do with the stars and the solstices and equinoxes. I mean, we've just had a solstice celebration here at the castle, which you've been here for. And I suppose it's kind of proto-astrology. I mean, astrology is a sophisticated version of the idea that as above, so below, everything that happens in the heavens is mirrored on earth. You can take that to extremes, you know, but the Druid teaching would be more that every event is related to every other event. Mm. And if you can crack the code, you can read the symmetries and patterns behind existence. There's an inner meaning behind existence, which they put into their art form, the spirals. If you go to New Grange in Ireland, you know, and other places, Gavrinis in Brittany, they have these incredibly complex spiral patterns on the stones which they've engraved. And from the air, the stone circles themselves have this beautiful aesthetic. They're like mandalas. Mm. So I think I define the metaphysics of Druidry as paradoxical simultaneity. Okay, which is a kind of phrase I've coined to explain what I think those symbols mean. The spiral is that this avenue of the spiral is simultaneous to this avenue of the spiral, to this one. But to make the journey in linear time, it seems to be different. Mm. So that the human life experiences, we go from childhood through maturity to old age. The Druids believed in reincarnations, so you come back around for another time, at a different turn higher up the spiral. Mm. So we've sat and had this conversation, you know, 10,000 years ago, for all we know.
Oh, speaking of which, I saw a funny cartoon. It was a little boy talking to his father, and the little boy says to his father, "That's okay, I don't believe in reincarnation when I was your age either."
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah.
Oh, you know, if I might interject something, I got a little shiver when you said that about the spiral, because one of the most interesting solstices I spent was when I was working on the Cosmos series with Carl Sagan. Ah. Because we were at a kiva in Chaco Canyon, New Mexico,
with the Hopi people.
Anasazi.
Oh, the Anasazi. Okay.
The Anasazi that disappeared. This was around 900. They think these ruins.
Right.
Were from. And we started our morning in a kiva that, as the sun peeked over the horizon, it completely filled an alcove through the wall of the kiva. There's a hole, and the light filled a certain niche, and then as the sun rose, it moved down to another niche and then disappeared. It was like completely filled the niche, moved down, completely filled the other niche, and then disappeared. Wow. Then, even more interesting to me, was we went up on the side of a butte, and there was something that had only been discovered 2 or 3 years earlier. There were these slabs of rock that looked like they had been kind of fallen off the mesa, but they were huge. They were probably 30 or 40 feet tall. Wow. And if memory serves. And then we set up our cameras to see what had been discovered a few years earlier, and we had to kind of shoot through the rocks to see it, but there was a spiral inscribed on the side of the butte in between these stones that at noon a dagger of light bisected that spiral perfectly and then disappeared.
That's amazing, yeah.
And even stranger than that, they understand that these slabs of rock weren't from there.
They were brought
from the closest place they could find anything like this was miles and miles.
And they were several tons in weight.
Yes.
Well, that's very interesting. Yeah. The spiral is also the pattern on one's fingertips and the hair, but also the galaxies. You know, it's a sort of fundamental pattern throughout creation, really. And I think the Druids could see that. The word Druid it comes from ancient Gaelic and Indo-European roots, similar to the Sanskrit term Dharma. The first part of the word Druid means Dharma, or truth, or the oak, the strongest tree, the tree that carries cosmic law, L-A-W. And then the vid bit means to see, as in the Vedas, or to know. And it's the root of the Greek word for idea as well. So a Druid is simply someone who knows or sees the cosmic law, the Dharma. And I think people like that have been in every culture, every tradition, be it Shinto, Japanese, like the founders of Aikido, or the American Indian tribes. You know, they had their Druids, their Dharma seers, their truth seers. One of my projects, which I've done as a philosopher, is to gather the words in all different languages for truth, God, wisdom, insight, enlightenment. Because it seems to me that we're suffering from a language problem on this planet. You know, a lot of the wars they're fighting in the Middle East and between Jews, Muslims, Christians, East and West, it's just like different dialects, different tribes, all saying, my word's best. You know, I worship Allah. No, I worship Yahweh. No, I worship the Trinity. And if you actually say, look, guys, let's look at the languages we're all using here and trace them back to their cosmic roots, their sound essences, you find that they're all actually in agreement. Like dolphins in the sea, they're all just, you know, peeping away. And that's...
Well, you know, it's also, I think that in the case of a lot of these things, it's the map becomes the territory in some of these instances. The dogma is what's interrupting the idea. The dogma is now taking over.
Yeah, we're fighting over the maps.
Right.
Which is what I would say all the sacred scriptures are. I mean, having studied them for 30 years, you know, I immersed myself in the University of Calgary, to which I owe a huge debt of thanks, and read the Bible, the Quran, the Vedas, you know, the whole things in depth, and came out the other side, you know, reading philosophers like Hegel, who'd come to the same conclusion, that there's a unity underlying the diversity of religious traditions and cultures, but that the text itself is just the map. I think the Taoist scriptures make that absolutely plain. The first verse says,
first
you know,
verse.
Yeah, the Tao that can be spoken about is not the Tao. You know, that's
right.
Like, every sacred scripture should have that at the front, first verse. Otherwise, the followers end up fighting over the text,
right?
The maps. You know.
I mean, we see it today with the whole idea of the Bible taken as a literal document. But when you think about it as a symbolic document,
it's superb.
You know,
it's wonderful.
Perfect.
Yeah. But it's often in the oral traditions, you see, that you get the wisdom of the non-literal.
Oh yeah, I was going to ask you about that, because the Druids never wrote anything down.
Well,
and it seems like, well, that's what I heard. And then, then I think that there was a real problem when the Gutenberg Bible was written, because that was an oral tradition until somebody wrote it down. I mean, theoretically, it didn't get printed as a mass thing and have this idea that now this is the word and it doesn't change. Joseph Campbell, who I was lucky enough to work with on a documentary about his life, you know, he talked about how the Native Americans, their mythology changed all the time. He said before white men came and you know, encroached on the land, there were no mythologies about ponies.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, their mythology included ponies. So it was an ever-growing
relationship. It was a living tradition.
Yes.
You know, what was that? Was that the Bill Moyers thing?
No, it was prior to that. It was called The Hero of a Thousand Faces.
And it was about his life story and stuff.
Yeah, it was with him. We went up to Esalen and interviewed him, and you know, and it was
Have you
great.
still got a copy?
Yeah, it's on Netflix.
Okay, no, I'd love to see that. What you're saying about the oral tradition is very important, because through my studies of comparative religion and philosophy, what I discovered is that within all the lineages, there's always an oral tradition that accompanies and predates the texts. So within the Islamic Quranic tradition, you have Sufism, which carries the wisdom of the Islamic tradition. I mean, Muhammad himself said the Quran comes from the mother of the books, the al-Kitab. The mother of the books is the Tao, the source. In Judaism, you have the Kabbalah, which means reception or transmission, and is the oral wisdom, which only according to which the Bible itself makes sense. You know, Genesis, Exodus, they're They're interwoven, coded metaphysical cosmologies, which were written down much, much later, at the time of the Zohar in Spain. I've just got back from Cordoba, where the Kabbalah was part of the Andalusian culture. And what I found with my study of the Druids, when I came back to Britain and went to the stone circles and met living Druids, is that oral tradition is also handed down in the Celtic world and in Britain. There is that. And that's why the Druids, it's not that they were against writing or didn't like literacy. They were literate. They actually were probably using Greek alphabet before the Romans conquered. And they had the Ogham script, which is a kind of ancient Druidical writing system. It's because they recognized that metaphysical truth can't be written down. It's too big. It can barely be spoken about. I mean, we're speaking, but we're just touching on.
Right.
So
I think that
things.
in writing it, you actually make limitations.
You simplify it. Yeah.
Right.
And then if you start in, battling over whose written text is the best, I mean, that's very undruidical. I mean, I have a dear friend, Archdruid of Avebury, who says that the internet is undruidical. And so many cyber wars break out on the internet. People argue about this message and that Facebook comment.
Right.
It's all daft. We should be developing telepathy and empathy and love, which is the authentic original internet that the Druids were using, for 10,000 years.
That makes sense.
The human heart. So can I ask another question?
Sure.
This is fascinating. You mentioned you went to California to get involved in the film industry, and you've worked in that a bit, and tell us a bit about that. And my question really is, how spiritual would you say the film industry is or could be? What are the people in Hollywood actually like? Do they have... Because it seems they churn out a lot of, violence and sex films. There's not enough spirituality. What's going on there? California's the home of,
Well, that's a good question. For me, I kind of fell into, when I went into the film business, I was looking for any kind of entree into the world that I could get, and I fell into making science documentaries.
You were saying.
And alongside of music videos.
Okay.
So the cameraman that I hooked up with, that really it all happened on the first day that I arrived in Los Angeles, coincidentally, through a series of interesting coincidences. Was a documentary cameraman who taught me everything I know about filmmaking, but principally through the making of music videos and science documentaries.
Right.
So we did a wide range of programs, but it was funny how these two kind of things fed me into the things that would feed me forever, including working on the science shows, and that led me to working with John Lilly. I forgot to tell you that when I bought the hours in the tank at that convention, the other thing that I bought was a T-shirt that I liked just because I liked the T-shirt that had two dolphins playing on it. And it was the T-shirt they were using to promote the Human Dolphin Foundation, which was John Lilly's organization.
Right.
So that day, without knowing either one of those things had any relationship to anyone named John Lilly, I bought things that were related to this.
Right.
Later, when I was working on a NOVA documentary about interspecies communication, I learned that we were going to be interviewing John Lilly, so I wore my Human Dolphin Foundation T-shirt that day. So John was nonplussed, of course, because this strange person that he didn't know walked in wearing a T-shirt of his organization. He knew there was something there, and this was in Northern California. And I said to he and his wife, I said, I don't really know anything about dolphins, and but I feel compelled to volunteer, but I live in Southern California. And Tony said, well, we live in Malibu here, call us. So that was the beginning of a long and wonderful relationship.
Right.
And
dolphins are sacred to Apollo, just to briefly interject, because they were recognized as divine even by the ancient Greeks in the ancient world and Minoan world in Crete. There are lots of frescoes of dolphins. And Delphi was founded by dolphins. And Delphi was the most important oracle place in ancient Greece, sacred to Apollo. And all the Greek philosophers, used to revere its word. So that's kind of interesting, isn't it?
Another personal connection to me is I married a woman whose name is Defino, that they believe is probably derived from Delfino.
Right. And just to let you know, I don't know if you know this, but the classical authors, when they got in touch with the Druids and heard about us, and the great Temple of Light, which is Stonehenge, and the other temples, they basically said the god of the Druids is Apollo, because they were trying to map Druidry on their own cosmology, and that was the closest they could come to it. We didn't worship Zeus, we didn't worship power, we worshipped Apollo, which is music, harmony, which is what the bards do, healing, which is what Apollo was, the god of medicine. His son Asclepius was the founder of medicine, and also prophecy. Apollo was the god of prophecy, and Druids are prophets too, ovates or vates. So, you know, Apollo was the closest deity the classical world had to what the Druids were doing.
Wow.
And these islands were sacred to the Apollo of the northern worlds, Apollo Hyperborea, beyond the north wind. So, back to dolphins.
Yeah.
It's exciting, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And
so the films, the spiritual films,
Oh, well,
where are they all? Why aren't they happening?
well, you know, I think they are, but I think they happen in kind of a different way in Hollywood. I think they're films of the spirit. Something like Harold and Maude is a very spiritual comedy. In a way, it's a comedy, and it kind of doesn't make sense, and it's a silly Hollywood movie.
Right.
But in another way...
Is that the Audrey Hepburn thing?
No, that's Ruth Gordon and Bud Cort.
Okay.
It was a story about a boy who's in his 20s and a woman who's just about to turn 80.